Sterling Point begins with Annie, a teenager from New York, waiting for the results of her application to her dream college. She believes getting accepted will determine the rest of her future, so when the rejection arrives, she is completely devastated. Her twin brother Connor teases her about the disappointment while her boyfriend Oliver prepares for a trip to Thailand and makes it clear that he does not want her coming with him. Annie feels as though every part of her life is falling apart at the same time. Things become even more emotional when their grandfather Gordon suddenly dies. During the reading of his will, Annie and Connor learn that once they turn 18, they will inherit Sterling Point, a secluded island in Canada's Muskoka region that had once been their mother Goldie's favorite place. Their father Stephen appears reluctant to discuss Gordon or the island. Instead, he quietly hides a letter Gordon left behind, making Annie suspicious that he is keeping important family secrets. That night, Annie secretly opens the family safe and discovers not only Gordon's letter, but a collection of letters Stephen has been hiding for years. The letters reveal that Stephen deliberately kept Gordon away from Annie and Connor, while also hinting that the island holds answers about Annie's past. Determined to uncover the truth, Annie secretly leaves for Canada without telling her father. The journey proves much harder than she expected. After taking sleeping medication before her flight, Annie arrives exhausted and disoriented. She meets Ellis, a friendly local pilot who flies her closer to the island, before meeting Joe, who operates boat transportation from the mainland. Since Annie has never learned how to handle a boat, Joe asks Una to help teach her. Una has plenty of responsibilities of her own, caring for her younger sister Maple while their mother travels in India. Annie also meets Sully, one of the island's more eccentric residents, who quickly becomes another memorable part of the close-knit community. As Annie settles in, she learns the island is worth millions of dollars and that many locals fear developers will eventually buy it if Gordon's family decides to sell. At a party, she reconnects with Rory, a friend from middle school, and meets his mother, Denise. During their conversation, Denise casually reveals something Annie never expected to hear. Goldie had once filed for divorce from Stephen. Annie had always believed her parents had a happy marriage before her mother's death, making this revelation deeply unsettling. When Annie returns to Gordon's cottage, another surprise is waiting. A teenage girl named Ramona is already living there and confidently declares that Gordon was her grandfather. Ramona refuses to believe Annie belongs there and treats her like an unwanted stranger. Although Annie is eventually allowed to sleep on the couch, the tension between them remains obvious. Ramona also possesses a letter from Gordon and has been caring for him during his final years. She struggles with anxiety and often uses marijuana to cope with it. Annie attempts to leave the island by kayak, but she quickly loses both her luggage and her paddle before Rory rescues her and takes her somewhere with enough signal to call Connor. During the conversation, she tells him about Ramona while continuing to hide the truth from Stephen. Connor also delivers painful news. Oliver has publicly come out as gay, and their relationship is officially over. Back on the island, confusion continues as the local community mistakes Annie's identity until Ramona finally confronts her publicly. Left alone together, the two begin piecing together the truth. Stephen and his current wife adopted Annie and Connor shortly after they were born. Annie had always believed Goldie died from cancer when she was only 2 years old. Gordon's letter urging Annie to find someone was actually referring to Ramona. Ramona initially refuses to accept the story and insists Annie should return to New York. Ellis encourages Annie not to give up, explaining how lonely Ramona has been while looking after Gordon. When Ramona eventually reads Gordon's letter confirming everything Annie has said, she finally accepts that they are sisters and invites Annie back into the cottage. As the sisters slowly begin adjusting to one another, Annie discovers an old mixtape labeled with Goldie's name. Despite Ramona's discomfort, she listens to it. The recording includes Goldie expressing love for Joe, Ellis's father, suggesting that Goldie's past was far more complicated than Annie had ever imagined. Meanwhile, Ellis quietly continues overcharging customers who pay in cash. Annie helps him shop for furniture while trying to organize a small gathering to cheer Ramona up. Rory assists with preparations, but the evening becomes increasingly chaotic. Ramona only agrees to join after hearing Una will attend, only to discover Una has brought another girl named Stacy. At the same time, Annie and Rory share their first romantic kiss on the porch. Ellis arrives carrying a repaired lamp, witnesses the kiss, quietly leaves it behind, and walks away heartbroken. The evening takes another unexpected turn when Connor suddenly arrives carrying the same lamp. After revealing that the island is worth $22.7 million, he announces that he wants to sell it and develop the property into a profitable resort. Annie is horrified by the idea and persuades him to remain on the island for 1 week before making any final decisions. During that week, the group spends time cliff jumping and exploring the island. Gordon's lawyer also contacts the family, while Ellis finally gathers the courage to ask Annie on a date. She happily accepts. Connor and Ramona begin finding unexpected common ground, while Annie and Rory continue growing closer. Una invites Ramona to the movies, where Ramona admits she has long believed she is gay, but has never had the confidence to fully embrace that part of herself. Denise later informs Rory about Ellis secretly overcharging customers, while Connor begins discussing a possible sale of the island through Denise's business connections. Rory becomes jealous after learning about Annie's date with Ellis and deliberately interrupts it. Although Annie and Ellis enjoy a warm evening together and even have their portraits drawn, Rory's interference prevents the date from ending the way Ellis had hoped. Ramona's evening ends much worse. After Connor gives her alcohol for the first time, she drunkenly confronts Una and Stacy, accusing Stacy of simply being another temporary relationship. Una becomes deeply hurt and insists Ramona imagined their earlier romantic connection. As Annie brings the intoxicated Ramona home, Joe angrily blurts out a devastating family secret. Goldie did not die from cancer. She died while giving birth to Ramona, and Joe was there when it happened. The revelation completely changes Ramona's understanding of her own life. She begins blaming herself for Goldie's death and falls into despair. Annie eventually confirms the story after Connor unintentionally reveals more details. Ellis meanwhile discovers documents suggesting Joe has served as Ramona's guardian and also listens to Goldie's recordings describing her dreams of building a family with Joe. On the morning of Connor's 18th birthday, Ellis gives Annie a heartfelt drawing of the two of them together. Before they can enjoy the moment, Rory arrives with tickets to a nightclub. Annie chooses to go with him instead. She drinks far too much and eventually sleeps with Rory before waking up horrified the following morning, unsure whether they even used protection. Back on the island, Connor receives a formal offer from Denise to purchase Sterling Point. Ramona apologizes to Una, and the two finally share their first kiss. Annie later returns and confides in Ramona about what happened with Rory, while Ramona admits that although she and Una kissed, their relationship has not progressed any further. Steven soon arrives on the island and finally shares his version of the family's history. He explains that he and Goldie struggled with infertility before adopting Annie and Connor. According to Steven, Goldie later wanted to leave New York, and he insists he never filed for divorce. Annie fiercely defends Goldie and argues that Ramona is Joe's daughter. Joe and Steven eventually confront one another on the dock, where Joe accuses Steven of reclaiming the twins with legal help after Goldie died. Their argument becomes physical, leaving Steven with a black eye. Annie later opens up to Ellis beneath the stars, admitting she feels broken after learning how much of her life has been built on lies. Ellis gently reassures her that she does not need to be fixed and teaches her to build a canoe as a way of calming her thoughts. Their growing emotional connection becomes one of the strongest relationships in the season. After another family confrontation at the cottage, Ramona disappears. Una quickly finds her and finally tells Ramona that she loves her. At the same time, Joe discovers Ellis has secretly taken more than $7,000 from the business. Ellis explains he believed he was protecting the struggling operation by creating a financial safety net. Shortly afterward, Ellis and Annie finally share their first genuine kiss. Joe later reveals another heartbreaking truth to Ramona. Before Goldie's death, the original plan had been for Goldie and Joe to leave their respective partners and raise the children together. After Goldie died, both Joe and Gordon believed Ramona would have a better life staying with Gordon, while guilt kept Joe distant for years. Ramona eventually reads Gordon's final letter and begins accepting Joe's explanation. A passing conversation about colorblindness suddenly gives Annie another idea. Ramona begins questioning whether Stephen could actually be her biological father. She confronts him with a DNA test, determined to learn the truth once and for all. The results confirm that Stephen is indeed Ramona's biological father. The discovery reshapes the entire family. Ramona sits down with Stephen, Annie, and Connor to discuss what comes next. Although she offers Stephen papers ending his guardianship responsibilities, he chooses peace instead of conflict. Annie also announces that she intends to remain on Sterling Point despite Stephen's objections. The revelation creates new problems for Ramona and Una. Ramona considers spending more time with Stephen or even moving to New York. Afraid of losing her, Una reacts defensively and the two end their relationship. Connor begins supporting the idea of selling the island again, arguing it would allow everyone to move on with their lives. Annie refuses because Sterling Point has become the place where she is finally beginning to heal. Connor then receives another life-changing phone call informing him that the adoption agency has located his biological mother. Near the end of the season, Annie sits with Joe as he finally explains exactly how Goldie died. Goldie suffered from an undiagnosed heart condition. During labor, she required an emergency cesarean section and smiled at Joe one last time before being taken into surgery, where she never survived. Armed with the final piece of her mother's story, Annie races to find Ramona. She discovers Ramona embracing Stephen after he gently asks whether they can begin spending time together as father and daughter. Watching the moment unfold, Annie realizes both of them finally have a chance to build the lives they were denied. The ending brings Annie to a decision that changes everything. Rather than forcing both sisters into the same future, they agree to exchange lives. Ramona will leave Sterling Point and move to New York, giving her the opportunity to build a relationship with Stephen, Annie, and Connor. Annie, meanwhile, chooses to remain on Sterling Point, believing the island has become the only place where she truly understands herself. The final scene confirms that the sisters have followed through with their plan. Annie wakes up in New York after the exchange, while Ramona begins the next chapter of her life connected to the family she has only just discovered. Instead of ending with every conflict resolved, the season closes by showing that both sisters have finally chosen the futures they believe will help them heal, with Sterling Point remaining at the heart of the family that Gordon always hoped they would become.